Summer, 1871. A dust-choked town called Ashridge, where secrets settle like ash and justice comes only for the powerful. The church bell clanged like a cracked jawbone, dragging the sleepy heat of noon into the pews of Ashridge's little clapboard chapel. Sunlight cut hard through stained glass, throwing broken reds and golds across the backs of weathered hands and bowed heads. The preacher's voice thundered from the pulpit like cannon fire. And the Lord said, "Vengeance is mine," he bellowed, sweat beading under his collar. "Woe unto the wicked, for they shall be cast down." But no one noticed the girl in the last pew flinch. When she sat, Clara Mae Winters, 17, barely filled her place on the bench. Her dress was clean, but worn, the calico faded like an old bruise. She kept her eyes down, not in reverence, not in prayer, but in discipline. Her hair, straw blonde and heavy with summer sweat, hung in a loose braid over one shoulder. Her hands were folded tight in her lap, knuckles white. Every time the congregation stood for a hymn, she rose slowly, stiffly, like her bones had been taught not to trust the movement. Jonas Hale watched from across the aisle. He hadn't come for the sermon, hadn't come for years. But when the bell rings in Ashridge, even the blacksmith shows up. He leaned against the back wall, arms crossed over a soot-stained apron. His eyes, the only sharp thing about his otherwise weathered face, tracked Clara, quietly, the same way you watch a wounded animal when it limps past your porch, pretending it ain't bleeding. After the benediction, the crowd funneled out into the dusty heat. A few women gossiped under parasols. Children scrambled around horse troughs. Clara walked alone, her steps uneven, her left leg dragged slightly, like her knee was swollen. Jonas caught it. Just a second. Just enough to unsettle his gut. Outside the general store an hour later, the heat had settled like a hammer. Jonas waited for horseshoes to be fetched from inside. Across the street, Clara hobbled up the porch steps. Deputy Roy Sutter held the door for her uncle. By blood, if not by behavior. Clean-shaven, boots polished, his star caught sunlight like a blade. He smiled to quick, to cold, placed a firm hand on Clara's lower back as she passed him, fingers pressing in just enough to guide. Jonas watched Clara's posture tighten like a pulled wire. Sutter met Jonas's gaze and held it, just long enough to say don't. Then he went inside. The next day, Clara came to the apothecary alone. Jonas, picking up tinctures for his busted shoulder, was behind the shelf when he heard it. Barely more than a breath. It hurts when I sit. Mrs. Elkins, the apothecary's wife, paused only a second. Then she smiled broadly and replied loudly, "Well, that's probably just the saddle. You'll toughen up, girl." Jonas leaned forward, peered between the shelves. Clara's cheeks burned pink. Her lips parted like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Nobody said anything. No one ever did. The town looked right through her. Jonas paid and left, the bottle forgotten in his hand. That evening, heat still clung to the town like guilt. Jonas stood at the forge, the ring of hammer and hiss of steam wrapping him in habit, but his rhythm faltered. He saw Clara in flashes behind his eyes, her flinch in church, her limp, that small voice in the apothecary. He slammed the hammer down to hard, sparks flying. In the corner, covered in a white cloth, was the trunk that hadn't been opened in 6 years. His wife's. Inside, her shawl still held the scent of pine soap and cinnamon. Her letters, yellowed now, and one torn scrap of paper she left on his anvil the week she died. "Don't close your heart to someone in need." He sat down heavily beside the forge, chest tight, throat dry. Ashridge had always been a place where folks kept to their own, where trouble was someone else's dirt to sweep. But Jonas Hale had lived through war, seen what silence cost, and something about that girl's eyes, not fear, not even pain, but the way they begged to be seen, it left him rattled. That night, he left the lantern burning in the smithy window. It was an old thing, a signal he'd once used with his wife, back when she'd walk the ridge at dusk, and he'd keep the fire lit to guide her home. It hadn't burned in years. Now, it cast a warm circle on the dark road. Just before midnight, boots patted across the gravel, soft, uneven. Jonas opened the door slow. Clara stood barefoot on the threshold. Her hand was torn, blood smeared across her shin. Her braid hung loose, bits of leaf tangled in it. When I was starting to swell, she didn't speak, didn't cry. She just looked up at him, eyes hollow and exhausted, and held out her hand. Jonas hesitated for half a breath. Then he took it. and pulled her inside. The barn smelled of old straw, rusted tools, and blood. Not much, but enough for Jonas to notice when he lowered Clara into the root cellar beneath the floorboards. She didn't flinch when his lantern cast long shadows across her face. Just blinked once, sat down without a word. Jonas laid a folded quilt beside her, rough wool, patched with his late wife's sewing. He knelt and pulled a bucket of clean water close, grabbed a cloth. For a moment, he hovered, her sleeves hid. More than they showed. May I? He asked gently, barely above a whisper. She nodded, her lip trembling for the first time. He pushed the sleeve back. Purple-black bruises marbled her arm like smoke under pale skin. Rope burns ringed her wrists, raw, angry, to fresh. Jonas sucked in a breath and looked away. He'd seen wounds before, on soldiers, dying men, but something about seeing them on her made his hands shake. She winced when the cloth touched her. I'll go slow. He murmured. She didn't nod, didn't speak, but she let him keep going. Hours passed in silence. The forge had gone cold, and the house darker still. Jonas sat on the cellar step with a shotgun across his lap. His dog, Sully, slept at his feet. From below, in the straw, Clara finally spoke. My uncle says I'm payment, she whispered, for the land, for the way he got it. Jonas didn't move. She continued, voice dry as dust. Mama said we'd only stay a while, said we'd go to Denver, but then she got sick, or maybe not. I don't know. I woke up and she was just gone. He looked down at her. She stared at the dirt wall like it had answers. No school, no friends, she said, just chores, and not sitting along. Jonas opened his mouth, closed it again. He had no words that didn't feel like lies. 3 days passed. On the 4th, the sheriff came knocking. With him, Deputy Sutter, and 2 others, armed, all on horseback. Clara stayed beneath the floor. Jonas stood in the doorway, forge soot smudging his face like war paint. Jonas, Sheriff Brody said, voice pleasant. Heard tell Clara Mae's gone missing. You seen? Heard. Jonas stared. Nope. Sutter narrowed his eyes. Girl's unstable, not right in the head. Runs off sometimes. Dangerous to herself, maybe, Jonas replied, but she sure never ran to me. They searched his barn. He let them, even unlocked the cellar trap door himself, and stood between it and their lanterns. They found nothing but winter onions and empty jars. As they rode off, Sutter glanced back once. His look wasn't suspicion, it was warning. Jonas closed the door and bolted it. When he turned around, Clara stood in the kitchen, pale, silent. He looked at her and knew this couldn't go on. That night, he dreamed of the war, of smoke and screaming, but when the dream changed, it was his wife kneeling beside him. You always did wait too long, she said, touching his cheek. He tried to hold her hand, but she vanished like mist. Then he heard her voice again, right in his chest. The strong do not watch the weak suffer. He woke with tears drying on his face. By dusk, he packed saddlebags. Where? Clara asked, voice rasped from disuse. A place folks don't follow, Jonas said. He saddled the mare, left Sully behind to watch the shop. Clara climbed up behind him, hesitant, then gripped his waist tight. It was the first time she touched another person with trust. He felt it, like lightning through worn leather. They rode out through the scrubland, past burned cottonwoods and dry creek beds. Stars came out one by one, like eyes opening, when coyotes howled in the distance. Clara flinched. Jonas said, they keep to themselves if they're fed. He didn't add that they weren't what he feared most. By moonrise, they reached Broken Hollow. The ravine cut through the land like a scar, rocks the color of blood, silence so heavy it felt carved. They made camp near the rim. Jonas unsaddled the horse, then froze. A rustle, not the wind. He turned, too late. A coyote lunged from the rocks, teeth bared. Jonas raised his shotgun, but a dark shape moved faster, a blur, a blade. The coyote dropped midair with a sickening thud. Behind it stood a man, tall, lean, face lined like canyon stone, braids tucked under a faded hat, skin darkened by sun, marked by time. Blue Elk. Jonas lowered the gun. I'll be damned. You look it, Blue Elk said, deadpan. Figured you'd die quieter. Clara stepped behind Jonas, clutching his sleeve. It's all right, Jonas said. He's a friend, from a long time ago. Blue Elk looked at Clara. Not long, not rudely, just enough to see. He nodded. Storm coming, You'll both die. Out here. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You gonna save us or just insult us? Blue Elk shrugged. Both. By morning, they were deep inside a hidden canyon, sheltered in a shallow cave Blue Elk used when the army sent scouts. There was a stream nearby, juniper and pine overhead. No roads. Clara huddled near the fire. Jonas built a spit. Blue Elk skinned. A rabbit in silence. In the following days, Clara began to move more freely. She followed Blue Elk around the camp. He didn't speak often, but he showed her things. How to carve soapwood for wounds. How to read wind by the trees. How to hide footfalls from men and beasts. She smiled once, a crooked thing, quick and startled. When Blue Elk teased Jonas about his cooking, Jonas nearly dropped the pot. One evening, after Clara had curled up near the fire, Jonas wandered up the slope. He found a flat stone, pulled his knife from his belt, and began to carve. He was halfway through her name, Annie, when he heard footsteps. Clara stood beside him, barefoot in the dark. She didn't ask what he was carving, just looked at the name, then at him. She placed her hand over his, lightly, just long enough to steady it. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. Jonas didn't answer. He just squeezed her hand. That was enough. Later that night, Blue Elk returned from scouting. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was cold. They put a bounty on you, he told Jonas. Say you kidnapped a girl. Say you plan to sell her west. Jonas stood slowly. How much? $50, Blue Elk said. Dead or alive? Clara's face went pale. They'll hang you, Blue Elk added, by week's end. Or worse, shoot you and call it justice. Jonas looked to the fire, jaw clenched. He'd only tried to save her, but justice in Ashridge didn't wear a blindfold. It wore a badge, and it was coming. They rode in just before noon. Jonas at the front, shoulders squared like he was headed to war. Clara sat behind him, wrapped in a dark shawl despite the summer heat. Blue Elk brought up the rear, silent as a shadow, rifle slung across his back. The sun burned high, exposing everything. No dust to hide in, no night to shield truth. Ashridge's main street stilled as they approached. Hammering stopped, shutters paused mid-close. Women on porches whispered, children stared wide-eyed, men leaned on door frames, hands close to their hips. Jonas didn't speed the horse. He let every bootstep ring on the dry earth. Let every eye see Clara's pale face, the shawl pulled, tied around bruises not fully healed. Let them all remember the girl they'd ignored. At the town hall, the judge had just sat down for lunch. Judge Albie Trant, portly, red-faced, with a mustache like a badger's tail, had known Jonas during the war, called him the Smith who never backed down. Jonas didn't knock. He walked in and stood before him, Clara at his side. I need a room, Jonas said. In 5 minutes. Trent looked up from his stew and froze. Hale, Sutter's lied, Jonas said. She's not missing. She's here, and she wants to speak. Behind them, Deputy Roy Sutter appeared in the doorway. This is ridiculous. This girl's been led astray. She's sick in the head. Shut up, Trent snapped. If she speaks, she speaks to me, alone. Jonas looked at Clara. She nodded, barely, and followed Trent into the back room. Jonas stood by the door, fists clenched. Sutter sneered. This town don't need its business aired to outsiders. Blue Elk stepped between them, quiet and calm. Then maybe it shouldn't hide its rot, he said. Inside, the judge removed his spectacles. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. Miss Winters, Clara looked at the wood-paneled walls, at the flag in the corner, then down at her hands. Then she stood and unwrapped her shawl. Her arms bore fading bruises in every color the body can bruise. Yellow near the shoulder, purple down the side. Her collarbone showed rope welts. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. My uncle said my body was rent for his land, that my silence bought him acres, and I bled for every coin. The room went still. Is that enough? She asked, voice cracking. The judge nodded slowly. Yes, Miss Winters, it is. Back in the main hall, Jonas heard the door creak. Clara stepped out, hair loose now, arms bare. Sutter looked at her, then laughed. You're really gonna believe a bruised-up girl with no ma and a head full of ghost stories? That did it. Jonas lunged. Sutter stumbled back, his boot scraping against the bench leg as Jonas slammed him into the wall, forearm across his throat. You touch her again and I'll break your neck. Jonas growled through his teeth. Sutter spat blood. You think anyone's gonna believe you? Blue Elk didn't move, just said, "Let them see. Let them judge." Trance stormed back in, pistol drawn. "Stand down, Hale." Jonas did. The judge looked at Sutter. "You're under arrest for falsifying a bounty, for abuse of badge. I can't prove everything else. Not yet. But this, I can." A deputy hesitated, then stepped forward and cuffed Sutter. The townsfolk outside watched in stunned silence. As the star was stripped from his chest, it wasn't the justice Clara deserved, but it was something. 2 days later, the judge called on Jonas with papers in hand. He offered Clara placement in a women's shelter near Carson, a chance at schooling, a life away from Ashridge. Clara listened quietly, then she shook her head. "I want to stay." Trant frowned. "Child, you sure? There's better out east." Clara looked at Jonas, then at the forge in the distance. "Mel doesn't bruise," she said, "and neither will I again." Jonas didn't answer at first. That night, he went into the back room of his house and unlocked the trunk that hadn't been touched in years. Annie's trunk. He lifted her old hammer, its handle worn smooth, her initials still carved in the grip. He held it for a long while. When Clara came in the next morning, he handed it to her without a word. She took it like it weighed 100 pounds, then nodded. The forge fire burned high. Clara stood before it, sleeves rolled, cheeks streaked with soot and resolve. She gripped the hammer tight. Metal hissed in the trough. Jonas watched from the doorway. She brought the hammer down once, then again. It didn't ring perfect, but it rang honest. Down the hill, townsfolk walked slower now. When they passed, a few even tipped their hats. None of them looked away. On the ridge beyond the forge, Blue Elk stood for a moment longer, then turned and vanished into the trees. No goodbye, no fanfare. Just the silence of a man who did what needed doing. Narration. Final line. The town looked away for too long. But when one man stayed, just one, it was enough to light a fire no silence could smother. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't stay silent. Like, comment, share it, because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one, to break the silence.